So these are the tools that I'm going to use to put the tyres on. I'll just work around this picture. So first thing is talcum powder or baby powder, and that's to let the tubes slide in the tyre when you're putting them in. You have to adjust them for the valve position, so talc will help you get those tubes in better. Some soapy water and a brush, and that's just to get the tyre rim over the wheel rim. I've also got this 90-degree connector, and you'll see how I use that later on. It just makes it easier to get into the valve of the DR. Something I would recommend that everybody gets is this valve locator and puller. It's actually quite hard to get your hand under the tyre bead, between the tyre bead and the rim, the wheel rim. It's actually quite hard to get your hand in there, because as you pull the tyre up, obviously the opposite bead also comes up and closes off the valve hole. And so the easiest way is to put your valve locator in, push your tyre down, pull your valve through, and then because you've got your tube lubricated with baby powder, you can move your tube along then to get a straight valve. And so I would recommend everybody buys a valve locator if you think you're going to be doing tubes, otherwise it's a nightmare. These bags are just for the levers, and so you can see how they fold down into 2 bags for all this stuff, and it makes it quite easy to pack. And then this is called goop, I think. It's just a high lubricant for soapy water. I put some in this one. I actually had some dishwashing liquid and some goop in that. Then the other side is Ziploc bags. I use Ziploc bags to put all the parts in as I'm pulling the wheels off, and that way you can't lose them. For this job I'm in the workshop because it was raining, so I've got an inflator which is on my air compressor. Now obviously as you're traveling you don't have that. I usually use a CO2 canisters or cartridges, whatever they're called, and I've got a small foot pump which is actually for cycles, but it's quite handy for packing away. It's only about a foot, it's not even a foot long, 10 inches long maybe, 200 millimeters long, and I use the foot pump for pumping up a tire. So the CO2 cartridge will give it the initial burst, and then I'll use the foot pump to tune the pressure. This attachment here is a bead breaker. It's the eastbound bead breaker. A lever goes on top and the bottom. You put it under the rim and it helps break the bead. I only used that once actually. I put it into the original tyre and the bead just started slipping off, so I used it once and then just went to the levers. These are obviously the levers, so you get 2 lengths that go together and then click on the end of the levers. They're made of aircraft aluminium, so they're really tough. Lightweight, and as you can see there, they all pack down. So I put the handles in one bag and then I put the levers in the other with the attachments. This little square thing is a tyre lever wheel hold down, and what that does is it keeps the tyre in the wheel well when you're taking it off or putting it on, and it just helps you to manipulate the tyre by using the wheel well. So that's really all I take for puncture repair. Oh, this container here is from, I think it's from Restwell, and it's just a tube file, sorry, some glue and some patches, and so I put all this other little bits and pieces in it. I think it's also got in there, oh there it's there. I usually have these valves and valve removers in here as well. So the valves removers go in there, the valve locator goes in there, and the 90-degree connector goes in there, and then the top goes on. It keeps it all nice and tight. And I've also got a small brush, it fits in here as well. So that's it. So let's see now if I can get these tyres off, the old tyres off and the new tyres on. All right, the time has come. There's still a little bit of tread on, there's still quite a lot of tread on these actually, but I just don't like these tyres. They're not great off-road, and they can be a little bit slippy and the road's wet. They're actually not too bad tyres, to be honest, but if you're off-road they're not great. Got some Motoz Adventure Tyres, so let me get them out and I'll show you what they look like. There we go, Motoz Tractionator Adventure. Don't know if I've got that the right way around anyway. You can see here how these are quite shallow, the tread in these, and obviously there's a whole finger in there, so they're a bit deeper. Good tread blocks on these, wider tyre. So let's get, so what I'm going to do is pull the wheel off. So there's my rear wheel off. This is the outer spacer. I'll tell you something, Suzuki doesn't like to put too much grease on things. That is really dry where it runs around the bearing. And there was hardly any grease on the inner spacer. So I think when I put it back together I'll put a little bit more grease on it, but I'm telling you something, Suzuki does not like to over grease. It's, and there go all my cush rubbers. It doesn't like to over grease its pivot points or bearing points, and there's a tiny smear of grease, you can just see it there. A tiny smear of grease in here. So I think Suzuki's got some sort of performance measure for its techs. It says the less grease you use, the more you get paid or something. But anyway, I'll make sure I cover that in grease on the way back in. My axle was absolutely dry. There was no grease on my axle whatsoever. So that just starts to set up corrosion if any water gets in. So I'll make sure I've got some decent grease on the way in. But just to let you know, as usual, Suzuki don't seem to put any grease on anything. And as a result, it runs pretty dry. So I'll make sure I remedy that on the way in. Right, so here's everything ready. This is the tyre I'm going to fit. I don't know if you can see that. Motoz Tractionator Adventure 130 by 80. Interestingly, when I took the nut off this, you can see here how the tube is actually, it's sitting like that. So this tube, this is a factory fitted tyre and factory fitted tube, and you can see how the tube's twisted in the tyre. So obviously when they tighten the nut up, it's squared it up, but the tube looks like it's already bent in that tyre. I'm going to use eastbound levers to take them off. So the eastbound levers pack down and they all fit together, which makes it really good for carrying. I'm going to fit a motocross ultra heavy duty tube, 17-inch tube, and I'll keep the original tube as a spare. And actually I do like taking the valve out completely. So when I do a tube, I usually take the valve out completely because you might be able to hear that. There's always pressure left in your tube, and any pressure left in your tube tends to work against you as you take the tyre off. So I prefer to take the valve out, and then at least you know that you've not got pressure working against you when you're trying to take it off. So that's my setup. Now I've got a best rest mat as well. So I'll put that on the ground. I'll do this outside on the grass. So I'll put the best rest on the ground. I've got the cush drive rubbers and everything off. I've taken all the spacers off the wheels so I don't lose them. It's something important. And I think we're all ready to go. So let's give it a try and see what happens. So the first thing I usually do is I start with the valve. And you remember I mark my valves with a red, so that's why. And I work my way around the tyre. So I have two in, I work them down, get the third, work it round, and then once I've worked it all the way around, then the levers go the other way and you just pull the tyre off. This tyre actually came off remarkably easy. I thought I was in for a bit of a struggle, but it came off quite easy. Now listen to this. You can hear air coming in and out the valve. So that's exactly why I removed the valve stem, because if that air was still in the tube, it's fighting against you as you're trying to get the tyre off. So by taking the valve off, it could never actually fight against you, the tube. So that's one bead broken. So I'll just break it all the way around now, and then we'll flip it off. Now there's another little secret to taking a tyre off. I don't know if people are aware of this, but the only way a tyre can come off is if the bead sits in the wheel well. So I don't know if I can see it here. So you'll see this side. If the tyre's sitting down in the wheel well, it can move in so the other side can come off. If it's sitting up on the rim, it won't come off. That's how a tyre works. So these little Eastwood things keep it down in the wheel well, so that when I levered it off there, it just moved into the wheel well and came off. If you're trying to fight a tyre off against its rim, that's actually how a tyre works, by sewing against the rim, exact fit. So you'll never stretch the tyre. Well, you will, not never. You will stretch the tyre, but it's hard work. So the easiest way to take a tyre off is make sure it's sitting down its rim, and then it will just pop off on the other side. That came off really easy for me. And so let me just continue this, and then I'll break the rim on the other side and get the tyre off. Right, there's the tube out. That took me exactly 8 minutes to get that tyre and tube out. And I'm doing it in the shed because it started raining, so I didn't want to go outside. So it took me 8 minutes to get that tube out. And taking the tyre out is exactly the same process. So it has to sit in the wheel well. So once the rim's in the wheel well, it essentially just pops off. And so that'll be me 10 minutes all up, and I've got 10 minutes all up including videoing, and I've got that tyre off. So that's not a bad effort. I'm sure there's some guns out there that can do it in about 2, but since I haven't done it for about 20 years, I think, I'm quite actually pleased that I did that in 10 minutes. So there's the tube out. I'll keep that tube for a future use, and I'll just lever the rest of this tyre off. Okay, so there's the inner tube placed, and I've got the valve through. So the first job to do is get the valve through, and then get the tyre on top of, make sure the tube's on top of the tyre bead. So you want it, when you're placing the tyre on, just make sure it's pushed in a little bit and the tube is above the tyre. Okay, so that's not quite straight. So this is about your only chance to straighten the tube. I did put some baby powder on my tube. I've got a really heavy duty tube in this, and it was getting very difficult to move around. So I did pull it out, put some baby powder on, and I can move it a little bit while I'm putting the tyre on. So what I'll do now is I'll just straighten up the tube to get the valve stem straight, and then put a locating nut on it, and then I'll work my way around the tube. Now obviously you don't want to have this at the back end while you're trying to put that side on, because the wheel well is your friend. So you want to use the wheel well and get the tyre well into the wheel well so you can get the tyre on. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably set this about 2 or 3 o'clock, and then work the tyre on from this side. I'll get this in at the wheel well and then work it up to the top there. And so I'm not working onto the valve, and I'm not working the opposite side to the valve, and that should make it a bit easier. So jobs to do now: get the valve straight and then work the rest of the tyre on. Now some of you might think, you've got your disc facing down, you shouldn't do that. Look, I'm inside, I've got a soft mat. I don't think it makes much difference. I think if you're bending your disc, you've got bigger problems that you're trying to fight. So the force required isn't really that great, so it should be okay. You can always turn it around the other way if you're a bit nervous about it. I just ended up doing this way, it doesn't really matter. Well, that took me about half an hour to get that tube on. I'm puffing like a blooming train. It was a very, very heavy duty tube, quite difficult to get under the rim. So the key is to get, as I said, get it under there, tuck it all under the side of the rim, and then I worked the tyre from about here, I think it was. So remember that the excuse me, remember that the wheel well is your friend, so I had that jammed under to keep it in the wheel well as I worked it round. And every now and again you just have to check that it's broken from the rim. It always wants to work its way up onto the rim, so you just have to check now and again that it's broken from the rim and you can get it on. So that's all on now. Hopefully I haven't pinched that big heavy duty tube, and if I have, I'm going to a motorcycle dealer and I'll get it changed. But that was an effort, I can tell you. Heavy duty rim, sorry, heavy duty tube, very stiff tyre, and that was quite tough to get on, to be honest. I suppose it gets better with practice. I used baby powder on the tube to help it move as I got it in, and then I used some water and soapy water to help get the tyre across. So now what I'll do is I'll blow it up and down a couple of times just to get the tube settling itself. So the tube now is, you don't want to blow your tube up straight away if you can help it. So what you want to do is just blow your tube up, let it down, blow your tube up, let it down, and it will settle itself in the rim, and then blow it up and leave it. Okay, let's get it blown up now. So what I've done on the bench is just inflate the tube. I put this adapter, 90-degree adapter on it, with no valve stem. Inflate it, drop it, inflate it, drop it. I did it about 5 times, and that just gets the tube settled. And every time I just tighten up the nut a little bit to get the valve in the right place. So as you inflate it, the tube will move a little bit. Remember, I put some baby powder in, and then the valve straightens itself up, tighten it down a bit, up again, down again, and then the tube is in its nice balanced position in the wheel. It doesn't want to move about now because it's in the right position. So now what I'm doing is I'll just put the valve in, inflate it to the right pressure, and I'll get the wheel back on. Now here's another little hint if you want it. When I took the wheel off, I put everything in Ziploc bags. So all my rubbers off the drive side, all my bushes, I put them all in Ziploc bags, and that does 2 things. One, it keeps them clean if there's any dust lying about, obviously, if you're at the side of the road. And number 2, you can't lose it. I saw a post recently on DR Riders, I think it was, or even Facebook, can't remember which, and it said he's lost one of his spacers. So all I do is when I pull everything off, put everything you don't need into Glad wrap bags, and then as you reassemble, they come out the bags, they're clean and you know where they are, and they're not lost in the grass or at the side of the road. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'll put the rubbers back on, and then the sprocket, and I've got this bush for the other side as well, and then it should all go back in. I've taken an opportunity to grease all the bearings everywhere. That side I didn't do very much. I think that should be okay. But I did the sprocket bearings and the inside of them, and so they should be pretty good now. So let's get it reassembled. Before I forget, the tyre popped on about 30 psi. So when it hit 30 psi, I had some soapy water around the rim, and the tyre just popped on, and there was no problems at all. So if you can't get the tyre to pop on, just put some soapy water around the inside of the rim and it will dry off. I use that goop or whatever it's called, and as I said, it just pops on. It didn't have a problem. Okay, let's get this tightened up. You also might remember that when I took this off, I marked the proper chain tensioner point. So the chain was adjusted right, so I actually adjusted the point before I took the wheel off. So when I put it back on, there was no stuffing about. It just went straight back on, and I knew exactly what the right point was, so I didn't have to adjust my chain on the way back in. And so that's a little key for quickly getting your wheel on. Mark your point for your proper chain adjustment, and then when you put it all back together, you don't have to bugger about with your chain adjustment. You just put it back to the same point and you're done. Okay, on to the front one. So the Bridgestone Trailwing, the original tyre, came off in about 10 minutes. It was quite a soft tyre, and it really came off the bead quite easily, so I didn't have any problems with that at all. The Motoz Tractionator, however, was a much harder tyre to get on. It's thicker, it's heavier. In my shed's quite cold. It's the middle of winter here, and so it was actually a very cold tyre. It took me 45 minutes, and I was sweating like a horse and puffing like a train. Some hints: the talcum powder was really useful because it enabled the tube to slide about inside the tyre, so I could get the valve adjusted. The soapy water obviously helps the tyre slide over the rim. I think if you're trying to do it dry, it's quite hard. I also tuck the tube over the rim to stop it pinching when I'm putting the tyre in, so I make sure the tube is completely tucked in before I put the tyre on, and that really helps you to stop pinching. And then when I go to inflate it, I just deflate a few times to let the tube relax in the tyre, and then it all seats fine. And if you really need some more soapy water, obviously you can put it on your rim as well to let it pop into place while you're pumping it up. And that's it. So that's the rear tyre done. It took me 45 minutes. It was a bit of a battle, to be honest. So what I'm putting on the front is a 1990-21, but this is a tubeless tyre, so it's 4-ply. So this is stronger than your normal tyre. And there's the one I took off. Interestingly, this is bi-directional, or whatever you call it, whereas the original one you have to put it in going in a certain direction. I've also got the heavy duty motocross tubes again. So here's the ultra heavy duty motocross tubes. So the heavy duty tubes and the 4-ply tyre will be interesting to see how it goes on. The original tyre just fell off. Literally, I deflated it, stood on it, and the whole thing just came off. So there's not much holding on the original tyre once it gets deflated. So if you ever get a puncture, it's probably going to come off the rim real quick. The Motoz ones are much heavier. You can just feel them just by pressing them. I presume that's a 3-ply and that must be a 4-ply. Anyway, let's get this tyre on. As I said, 90x90-21. It's tubeless, so it's 4-ply. The rear's 4-ply as well. And this doesn't matter what direction it goes onto it, so it makes it a bit easier. Right, let's get it on. So again, same as the last one, valve located and tightened, making sure the tyre is under the tube, and then start working your way around. I tuck the tube in all the way around under the rim to make sure I can't nip it. So if it's under the rim and not hanging out sort of by the side there, you can't really nip it. Famous last words. So as I said, tube's all tucked in, valve is tightened and straight. I'll put some talcum powder on it again, and I'll just start working it round. Actually went on quite easy. I think a 21 wheel's probably easier than a 17-inch wheel because you've got much more rubber to deal with, so it can stretch more. Okay, let me just finish this off. Similar to the back axle, as soon as I took everything off, into a Glad wrap bag, zip locked, and then I know I'm not going to lose anything in there. Now this axle is 65 Newton meters to go in. I've lubricated the speedo housing with some grease. I've put some grease on that side as well where the seal is, just to keep dirt out and water out. And these nuts here are only 10 Newton meters. Now 10 Newton meters is absolutely nothing. So I have seen people snap these, So yeah, so don't over tighten these. They need absolutely nothing. It's actually so soft, you sort of think, oh, that can't be right. But 10 Newton meters for these, 65 Newton meters for the axle. So these are tubeless tyres with 4-ply, because they've got, I think the tube tyres are 3-ply. So this gives me an extra ply plus the heavy duty tubes. I think the back are 4-ply anyway, plus the heavy duty tubes. And so there's my tyres changed. Now the bad news about this is I haven't got an excuse now. so I've taken the death wings off, so any excuse is all on my own. The other thing to be aware of is the Motoz tyres don't have any dots on them, so they don't have a yellow dot or a red dot or anything like that, or not that I could see anyway. So the back had a little squiggle on it that I thought might be something, but I'm not sure it is. So anyway, so back's on, front's on, I'll get it torqued up, and that's me finished. New tyres, no excuse. So the Bridgestone Trailwings original, they fell off in about 1 nanosecond. I deflated the wheel, I stood on the rim, or I stood on the tyre rather, and they just popped off. So they came off real easy. So if you get a puncture with that, the Trailwings front tyre, it's probably going to come off the rim very quickly. The Motoz Tractionator Adventure, it was not as hard as the rear tyre. It took me about 15 minutes to get it on from start to end. It was a lot easier than the back tyre, as I said, and it's probably because a 21-inch wheel gives you more rubber to stretch as it goes over the rim. So a 21-inch is much easier than a 17-inch to go on. They're both 4-ply, and so that gives me some extra ply for puncture resistance. Thanks very much for watching.